So welcome everyone, and I will get us started off with a karakia. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa ponamu te moana. He huarahi matato I te rangi ne, aroha atu, aroha mai, tato ia tato katoa. Omie, huie, taipie. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us for this panel discussion on preventing family violence towards Rainbow people. I'm going to keep my introduction quite brief because we have these three amazing panelists from the RVPN, and I want to give as much time and as much space to each of them to speak to their own roles and introduce themselves and the network. But just for myself, I am the campaign coordinator for This Is Us campaign, which is an awareness campaign to prevent violence towards Rainbow people, and I will be the facilitator for this evening. So I'm going to pass us over to the first panelist to introduce themselves. So Ada, would you like to introduce yourself?
Kia ora everyone, I'm Adeline Greig. I'm the Systems Manager at Gender Minorities Aotearoa, and I also sit on the Rainbow Violence Prevention Network. I've been working in the prevention of violence against transgender people for around a decade now, and I'm really happy to be here today to share some of that expertise with all of you. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you, Ada. So I might pass over next to Rafiqah to introduce herself.
Salam alaikum, kia ora, kamusta. I am Rafiqah, she, her. I am part of the Rainbow Violence Prevention Network, but I also wear other hats. I'm part of Rainbow Path. For tonight, I will be representing the Ethnic Rainbow Alliance, and I'm about equity and housing in particular, but also coming from lived experience. Thank you for everyone coming.
Guessing that's over to me, so I'll just jump in. My name is Jono. I'm Selu. I work for an organization called Ngākau Kahukura as the practice lead, and I've been doing violence prevention work for a while. Since about 2009 is when I first started in the space, so going on like 14-ish years. If I can do maths. Sure, let's say 14. Someone can correct me in the chat if that's wrong. Also, I just want to acknowledge it's Samoan Language Week, so manuia le Samoa. Yeah, that's probably enough about me. I'll pass back to Rose.
Kia ora, thank you. And thank you all so much for being here to speak to this important issue. Have a bit of kōrero and give the opportunity for some of the mainstream practitioners in the space to come and ask some questions. So just a couple of housekeeping notes. You can ask a question at any time. Try to please use the Q&A function, and we will get to the audience questions in the second half of the panel discussion. So the first half, we're just going to kind of go through a few questions, a bit of a discussion between us, and then we'll get to audience questions in the second half. I really do encourage, please, for you to ask any questions that you have, and just give a thought to asking kind of in a respectful way, but mindful of your language and stuff like that. But this is a learning space, and we welcome your questions. So getting started with the first question for Jono. So this panel is being hosted by Rainbow Violence Prevention Network. So Jono, can you tell us what is the Rainbow Violence Prevention Network and how does it function? As well as what do you see some of the benefits being to being a part of the network or having the network in existence.
Thanks, Rose. I was really trying not to say anything in my introduction, which is why I was like, oh, yes. So the Rainbow Violence Prevention Network, or RVPN, is a nationwide collective of organizations and individuals who work at the various points throughout violence prevention work, actually through violence prevention, intervention, and in some cases postvention as well. Our membership is mostly non-profit organizations that either are what we would deem as mainstream social services that provide direct violence prevention work to communities, or rainbow organizations, which are queer, trans, and intersex-led organizations that do a wide range of things to support queer, trans, and intersex folks all throughout Aotearoa. But part of that includes doing violence prevention, which many of us don't necessarily always think about it, but our work is always inherently about the prevention and addressing of violence, both on systemic levels and also on individual levels. So when we're talking about violence prevention in that space, there's a whole bunch of interlinked things where you might have somebody who is a mainstream practitioner working in, a queer or trans or intersex person who is working in a mainstream organization, doing specifically violence prevention on the ground or at a systems policy level. And you may also have rainbow organizations where you've got rainbow folks doing violence prevention as a part of their broader work with creating communities that are better for our community, for our rainbow communities. So one of the benefits of us being able to work collaboratively, I mean, the whakapapa of it was around actually trying to activate and bring people together, because when you work in mainstream violence prevention, it can be really lonely as somebody who's a part of a rainbow community. You may not know anyone else who works in the space. You may not have regular connection with those folks. And so part of it was us being able to come together in somewhat of a peer support network in the first place. From there, it's kind of grown. It grew originally out of Tuanest, which is this the National Network for Ending Sexual Violence Together. But as we recognize that a lot of our experiences are connected, a lot of the people we talk to, that we see, that we observe in the narratives that are around, often are connected specifically to both sexual and family violence experiences. So we expanded the network slightly, shifted somewhat away from Tuanest, but not too much away, because that's a useful connection and relationship to have, and focus more on actually building our collective power and process together. So we've been going through all of that in the past about 5 years, and have gotten to the point now where we're starting to run projects and connect in with each other a lot more regularly. I see these folks pretty much at least once a week at this point. And what that's done is it's meant that we've actually been able to have specific work happening for rainbow communities by rainbow communities in the violence prevention space, funded through government processes. So yeah, that's a really brief kind of look at all of the things. Back to you, Rose.
Kia ora. Thank you so much for that very thorough introduction of the network, Jono. Yeah, I think it's just really useful to kind of put the network and the mahi that is being done kind of into this context as we sort of move forward with this conversation. So the next question that I have is for Rafiqah, and it's building on this kind of context building, and really what we're wanting to start to talk about now is just thinking about that aspect of family violence in a rainbow context. And my question for you, Rafiqah, is how are the needs of rainbow communities different in that family violence context?
It is often assumed that the rainbow communities, people think that we're one community when there's different communities. Often they homogenize us, so therefore there are different needs for different communities. I will talk about it from a bit of my perspective. For example, there are religious rainbow people, and often they get isolated not only from their religious communities, but from the mainstream rainbow communities. And these needs are often not addressed because when we think about needs of rainbow, we don't think about the different intersections, like, for example, disability or like needs for different ethnic groups. And like, it's the same with religious rainbow people. And often I wanted to bring up the point about stop asking questions in inappropriate times. For example, like when you're dealing with a client, they are not there to answer your questions, and it's often, because it's a learning curve. Like, you think it's appropriate to ask questions like, for example, I thought that Muslims didn't accept queer people, and then the client ends up telling you a whole lot of information, and this becomes like opportunities for professional development. But the thing is, like, they are in a vulnerable position, and you have to realize, like, hey, am I asking that in the right time? Are they getting equitable outcomes? Yeah, thank you.
Yoda, thank you, Rafi. So I think that, yeah, it's so important for us to understand, those aspects of diversity within rainbow communities, that there's not just one rainbow experience. There are so many different experiences, and also the importance of mainstream practitioners to be able to do their professional development so that they're not leaning on their rainbow clients for that. And that's sort of what we want to start thinking about next. Obviously, RVPN is a network of different, some mainstream, some rainbow organizations. And I think in this context, we want to be thinking about, well, what is it that the rainbow organizations can do? What do rainbow orgs offer in terms of support to mainstream service providers? So, Jono, can you please speak to that?
Number one question that comes through a lot as well. Like, how can our rainbow community organizations be supporting other organizations or other folks who do health and social service work to better respond or to do rainbow stuff? As you can probably all imagine, like, the demand that actually sits on our rainbow organizations is quite heavy, which means that our rainbow organizations are quite stretched. Many of our organizations are also smaller than you would think they are. We just do big things, and very much go big. There's no way to go home. It's just go big for most of us. And so when it comes down to what needs to be done, or like how can rainbow organizations be supporting our mainstream service providers in the violence prevention space, it's often, it needs to start with our mainstream organizations doing some thinking about, well, what do we actually need? If there is nothing else that you remember from this point, what I would like you to be able to take home tonight is that it is the responsibility of mainstream organizations to remember that mainstream organizations to remember that rainbow work needs to be embedded into your work. It's not necessarily just a specialty piece. There are some things that will require some specialty knowledge, but a lot of the things that can be done to support our queer, trans, and intersex folks who have experienced violence, even thinking about rainbow stuff on a systemic and policy level, is the basis of what most of the practice is within violence prevention organizations. So if you're approaching a rainbow organization, first off, have some thinking about what it is you actually want to do. What are you trying to actually embed into your work? Secondly, please feel free to jump onto our organizations' websites and check out what resources are actually available. We've been really aware that there is not enough resource out there specifically that is Aotearoa, that is rainbow prevention, rainbow knowledge, and that is also violence prevention. So we've done lots of work within our organizations to try and get as much out there as possible. So things, our organizations like Outline, like Inside Out, like Gender Minorities Aotearoa, Te Ngākau Kahukura, the RVPN website itself, there's all really great resources that are available there. So I highly encourage that you go and check those out. Use those as some of your baselines for developing the questions of what does our organization need in order to be better competent at doing rainbow responsive practice. Similar to what Rafiqah was saying as well, that getting any queer person in to do training or things like that, that's not actually useful. You need to have people who know how to do rainbow violence prevention work and rainbow stuff and be able to put that knowledge together, rather than what I tend to call off the cuff, that you're getting your gay cousin or your trans cousin to come in and do a workshop with you about, well, what does it mean to be queer or trans or intersex? The specialists, most of us are somewhat connected to RVPN in a variety of ways. That's an important piece there. But again, come to us with really useful, specific questions. Finally, I think the other point in here, and this is putting it back onto our mainstream organizations, and I appreciate that everybody is stretched. But our practitioners and our providers must be able to put resource to the provision of things like professional development, of stuff around advocacy, all of those things. Some of that is financial resource, i.e. pay the people that you bring in, but it also includes your time, your energy, how you connect and commit to things. It often needs to have that systemic buy-in from your manager levels. There's a lot of stuff in there. And it isn't about saying, hey, mainstream orgs, you don't know the things and so you need to learn. It's about saying, this is the stuff that we can provide, but we are really under-resourced. So how can you bring us in a supported way? Likewise, the rainbow sector as a whole can learn stuff around the violence prevention space and a lot of the mechanisms that sit in there. So it becomes a mutually beneficial relationship in the long term. But the start point being, ask questions yourselves of your organizations and what it is that you actually need. Does that make sense? Cool. Sweet.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Jono. And so we had someone asked for Jono to repeat the list of organizations. I've just popped it into the chat, but Jono, would you like to repeat it again as well?
Sure. So the list of organizations I just read off, I'll move a little bit slower. Outline, Inside Out, Gender Minorities Aotearoa, Te Ngākau Kahukura, as well as the RVPN website. And I do see that somebody's also asked what's the best possible way to connect in with us. Best way to do that is to jump on our website, which is rvpn.nz, and you'll hear that quite a few times throughout the rest of this webinar. But a lot of the connections to what organizations are also on that website too. Oh, and Moira put it in the chat. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so important, I think, for those mainstream organizations to think about, like, actually what is the specifics that they need to be doing. And I think of some of that kind of real kind of groundwork level is also like understanding rainbow communities and understanding what it is that we face in terms of getting access to help. So Ada, for you, would you be able to speak to, please, what specific barriers prevent rainbow people from getting support for family violence?
Yeah, so on that kind of topic of what's currently missing, would say one of the first things to talk about is the fact that that basic level of help is really often missing, and instead there's actually harm that's happening. Intersex Aotearoa and Gender Minorities Aotearoa, who are both inside of the RVPN, recently released a small paper on people's experiences seeking help for family violence and sexual violence in Aotearoa, which showed that that process of finding help, only 13.9% of the people surveyed said that that wasn't harmful. So that's almost 1 in 8 were not being harmed, which means everyone else was experiencing some level of harm from that. Part of that is, there's a lot of those basic resources are missing, those educational resources for people who are seeking help and also for the people who are trying to provide that help. RVPN has been able to fill some of these gaps by creating sex educational resources. We're currently working on best practice guidelines as well for practitioners in the field. There's a few other things that contribute to the barriers, like the understanding of the social determinants of health and how those affect the lives of rainbow people. Things like having employment, time, access to transport, those things that can stop people from having good health outcomes in general and also stop people from being able to access that support. And it's really important that people understand that stigma and discrimination are also social determinants of health. Those are also going to affect people's outcomes, and those are also going to affect people's access to money, to time, and to things like transport to be able to get those. Another issue is often there's research inadequacies. Research is often not led by rainbow people, and questions are asked that don't necessarily allow for rainbow people to describe what their experiences are. We might see research done where no trans people are involved, whether that's in the sample, people aren't being asked their genders in ways that are okay for them, or none of the analysis is being done by people who understand the issues for those people. And alongside that, we also do see that some research is conducted with agenda or with a bias that might result in inadequate results. We also know that there's a history of a kind of binary feminist analysis, which we might call it the sex-only analysis, and that can be a real driver of harm and division, compared to, say, an intersectional analysis, which can drive inclusion and, discovery of other people's experiences and discovery of understanding how to support people whose experiences are different and might not previously have been included. Jono also mentioned thinking about what your policies are, I think, and making sure that there is a protective policy in place, not just for the clients, but also for the people who are providing the services, ensuring that your organization is going to be a safe space for rainbow people to be fully out, be fully themselves, be able to share their own experiences and their feelings without having to worry about that. We do also see things like sexed and gendered discrimination as a form of victim blaming. There's a history of non-conforming gendered behaviors being seen as perverse or in some ways dangerous. This can be things like seeing someone who was assigned male at birth wearing a dress as being some kind of a sexual fetish, where that might then be seen as being by default a form of family abuse if someone is dressing in a certain way. And that can have effects across the courts, across custody decisions, and also in therapy and getting support. There's also an issue that's very related to that, where often some of the really simple forms of gendered and sexed coercion that can happen within families aren't seen as sexual abuse or as family violence. That might be things like parents insisting on keeping the door open and making sure their child stands to pee or sits down to pee or whatever it is that they've decided that child should be doing, where those people are having their privacy taken away, having gendered or sexed behaviors forced on them through coercion. And that's often seen as natural or excusable, and that kind of lack of respect of non-conforming gendered behaviours can exist not just in those families, but in the services that are meant to help people. We've also seen examples of people being put back into unsafe conditions by police or schools, where children might be running away and saying, my family are not respecting my identity. And we know that what that looks like is a consistent disrespect and neglect for that child's life. But if that kind of misgendering isn't seen as an actual issue, then that child might just get put back with the family that is being abusive to them. And in that case, there's going to be a huge barrier to them being able to get actual help from those services. In general, transgender people are sometimes not seen as having a place in family. We do know that, across the world, transgender people have families, are parts of people's families. Transgender people are whānau, but there is a narrative that says that being transgender is something that happens outside of families when that's not actually true. So that can be seen as inappropriate. And that's another one of those things that can lead to really serious issues of family rejection, neglect, or unfair decisions from courts over things like custody. So those are just some of the barriers that exist.
Thank you, Ada. So yeah, thank you for providing a fairly comprehensive answer in the kind of amount of time that we have. Obviously these issues are incredibly complex and could fill a number of kind of panel discussions. But I think it's helpful to sort of start to shape some of those pictures for people so that we can then start to look at what are some of the solutions for some of these problems as well, and how do we start to create more inclusive practice and better outcomes for people. And so Rafiqah, if you could please talk to what needs to be done. What are some of the things that we could be doing to create better outcomes in this area, and how can we do these things?
I would say one of the things that needs to be addressed in this area is housing. And when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about establishing accommodation. The need for housing for our community isn't a new solution. It has been an ongoing solution, especially for those of us who come from the marginalized groups within the wider rainbow communities. And like the housing to be attached to social services. What I mean by that is a place where people can feel safe and stay, but also get the services come to them. Because often when we think about violence prevention, and especially family violence, what mainstream organizations and the institutions do is they blame the family, which is very unhelpful, because often they will put you back into those environments and like the hostility will increase. But at the same time, how are you preventing the violence if there are no accommodation where it is safe? And also, a lot of people who are marginalized do not have their own income. Therefore, if you put the accommodation where they can feel safe and connected to mental health services, social services, it will allow them to heal, but at the same time have safety and distance from people that would potentially harm them. And that is one of the solutions. And it's not a futuristic solution, nor an impossible solution, but it is an equitable solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Rafiqah. Yeah, I think it's, when you kind of brought up this idea when we were prepping for the panel, I kind of was struck by how incredibly sort of powerful it is in its simplicity, that really making a strong combination of social services and rainbow inclusive accommodation. And I think that it's one of the things that's useful to talk about the solutions is that we can realize then that some of them might actually be accessible. And I'm sure that between all of the people who are in this room, there's a lot of influence within the space to really institute some amazing stuff. And so now I'm wanting to move us into looking at some of the audience questions. I'm going to open these up to the panelists generally. So the first question that we have is, could you share some more around some of the projects that the network engages in?
I could speak to one of the completed projects that was a project that involved gender minorities Aotearoa as well as intersex Aotearoa that was done through the Rainbow Violence Prevention Network, which was the Transgender Guide to Sex and Relationships. And that's sex education for transgender people. It's an 18+ course and it's 2.5 hours long. We do have on our website, on the sex and relationships section, there's also a number of separate resources from within that course, but the full course itself is a different kind of experience going through that bit by bit. And that was designed because there wasn't currently any sex education that Rainbow people were saying that they felt it actually included people of all genders and people of all sexual preferences. And that's one of the cool things that the Rainbow Violence Prevention Network has done.
Roz, I feel like you should talk to some of them because some of them have been your projects. But before we jump into that, just to kind of go off what Ada was talking about with sex education, because I noticed that's another one of the questions as well. A youth program was made as well, and that's, I think it's still in a pilot phase at the moment, or soon to be in a pilot phase, but it has been developed. And that was written between Rainbow Youth and Inside Out. Again, acknowledging that our queer, trans, and intersex young people might go to school, but not necessarily have adequate, full stop adequate violence prevention education, but also specific education that is around their own identities as queer, trans, or intersex people, and violence prevention and relationships and consent, and all of the stuff that we want our young people to know about. So our course was also developed as part of that package of funding that all came out of Te Aotearoa 2 years ago. I'm going to say 2 years ago. I feel like it was beginning of last year. Yeah, that's almost 2 years ago. Where we got the first kind of major injection of funding into the space that is from government to Rainbow communities. There are another few projects that I'm going to pass over to Rose, because Rose is either currently working on or has been working on them for the past few while.
Good, thanks, Jono. Yeah, so my involvement with the network has been specifically to work on a few of the projects that the networks had going on. The first project that I've been involved with is a violence prevention awareness campaign I mentioned right at the top of the panel discussion when I was introducing myself. And that campaign is really responding to the fact that Rainbow people kind of generally across the board tend to experience higher rates of violence, but our understandings of violence tend to also be very sort of cis and heteronormative. Our understandings of violence tend to exclude rainbow people a lot of the time. And so we've been running for, I guess, just over a year now, a campaign just to increase awareness around rainbow experiences of violence, also just to promote some healthy behavior, healthy relationship behaviors within rainbow communities, but also really looking at how we can increase that awareness, particularly in the violence prevention space. And so this panel is a part of that project. The more recent project that I've been involved with that I think Jono mentioned in one of his earlier answers is best practice guidelines for violence prevention practitioners when working with rainbow people, and arguably really sort of it should be when working with anyone, because it's really about understanding that we need to undo some of this really kind of normative thinking that we have around experiences of violence, and that can actually improve people's practice across the board when dealing with a whole range of different communities, as well as rainbow communities in particular. So that project is underway, and it will be out and available to practitioners to engage with that later on in the year. Yeah, so those are the ones that I'm involved with. So the next question that we have is, where are the best places to refer rainbow people who are dealing with family violence? I'm based in the southern region and would love some suggestions for people specifically based in this region if those kinds of resources exist.
I'll jump in. We're all doing the like, who's gonna go first? I'll jump in with that one just to kind of kick us off. So in terms of that, it's I will admit, so I'm based in Tamaki, and will admit it is hard to recommend specific places. And part of the reason for that is what I want to put in here is that this is why we were saying that our mainstream service providers really do need to do the work to make those relationships. It becomes really difficult to just do a referral over so this is often what happens, and we see it up here in Tamaki as well, is that people will make referrals, or organizations or councillors will make referrals to rainbow organizations, but the referral is not correct, like it's not useful because that organization doesn't have the correct capacity to support that person through their experiences of, in this case, family violence. Often what our workers are doing within rainbow organizations is more being very careful about how I use this, but peer support. So support from community to community, as opposed to that mental health model of peer support. And so it's not the same as having longer term interventions from a counsellor or navigating systems. This is where it becomes really important for our mainstream organizations to make sure that they are upskilling around rainbow stuff and making rainbow knowledge part and parcel of the stock standard delivery that that professionals in violence prevention actually do. So when we're talking about referring rainbow people who are dealing with family violence, you may want to refer over to a rainbow organization, but you've got to have a good reason for that. The other part to it is actually the best place to refer somebody is to an organization that supports people who are dealing with family violence, especially if it's in a direct way. There are caveats there. Some of our organizations are not so great, and can, as Ada pointed to before, can be more harmful than helpful. So that's where it becomes important to know which of our organizations in our local areas are actually trying to find a nice way to put this, but I'm just going to say it straight. are not shit to queer, trans, and intersex people, and can do their best to hold space for our communities who come through who have had experiences of violence. Is there anybody else who wants to say anything else to that? Great.
Yeah, I could add a bit to that. I think that one thing that can work really well is if you are making a referral to a family violence service and you don't know that that family violence service isn't maybe going to have problems or won't be perfect, you know, or even if you do think they're going to be great, that it can be a really good idea to also refer someone to some kind of peer service that does exist. Often that we are the kind of spaces where people are coming saying, hey, I've had a bad experience seeking help for family violence, and we're able to talk them through that, what their options are, and help them move on to the next step. Yeah, another thing to think about in terms of that as well is that we're currently working on the best practice guidelines where none exist that we would currently endorse. And once those do exist, if organizations are picking those up, we're going to be more able to easily refer people to, you know, the organizations that are following those guidelines.
Thank you, Ada. So the next question that we had is a person is identifying some transphobic attacks that they had against them in a work situation, and also like a physical transphobic attack that was being handled by the police. And they've just asked, how do you, and they've identified that they're working as a counsellor, but just that they're still sort of struggling with the weight of some of this stuff, and asking just how do you sort of deal with these things mentally as a trans person. And I think I'll let the panelists decide who would like to speak to that.
So in a situation like this, I'm probably not going to talk about my own methods for processing that kind of violence being done toward me. What I would say is that, again, we are trying to do the work to make sure that there is some kind of care for people once those kinds of things have happened, and working on trying to prevent those things from happening in the first place. I'd also say that, you know, it can really help to be aware of what your rights at work are. Your employer does have a responsibility to keep you safe from violence while you're at work. That's their legal responsibility. And even if they don't know how to carry that out, it is their duty to do so. And I think that also fits in with, you know, a lot of these mainstream services that often do have a handful of rainbow people working at them. It is best that they have policies so that it's easy for them to refer to something, so that they know what the standard process is to ensure that they do uphold their responsibilities to keep their employees safe while they're trying to keep other people safe.
And oh, Rafiqah, you want to speak? Go.
Sure. Also, like Ada, I won't really address it like with my personal thing, but I do believe that raising awareness of what happened, keeping documentation is really important in this situation, because like it takes a toll. I won't get into what I've been going through, but like it really does take a toll. And there are times where you feel very lonely and very isolated. But what we're doing in the RVPN, we are basically pushing this forward because this is not, this is not an isolated incident that the mainstream want to portray it to be. And institutions are very, like, how do I say this? They create barriers and blockades to get through it. But, raise your voice, don't raise your voice, but like connect with community. That is the best way to deal with it, like strengthen numbers, I would say.
Thank you, Rafiqah. Jono, did you want to add something on this? All good. Thank you. So the next question is, what sexual education / sexual violence prevention is happening now, particularly in reference to ACC having pulled the funding from mates and dates?
Ada, I think we've lost your sound.
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Yeah,
no, it's back.
should be back. So I did already mention and link in the chat the transgender guide to sex and relationships that we developed, and we do also have some more sex and relationships resources for people to use to learn about this stuff. A lot of these are great reading for people who are doing that kind of education work, and they're also great for sharing with the people that they are educating. We'd recommend familiarize yourself with a bunch of these things, give them to people, talk them through them. And also, as we've heard, there is I think it's in the pilot stage at the moment, education for children, which was developed by Inside Out and Rainbow Youth, and that's in the works.
Just a shout also, anybody from that ACC who might be in the ACC or policy development space, it's a gap. We're not gonna lie about it. It's a gap, and we know it's been a gap for a long time as well. So it would be, to throw it out there as well, it is a really important component of the thinking when you're developing programs, whether that's at a government funded program development level, or even, oh, what happened to Ada? Or, oh, there is Ada. Or even at a local level. A lot of our many of our violence prevention organizations are used to having to do a whole bunch of things that are very not quite in the scope of what you would usually have to do, but there is a need in community, and it's just easier to do it yourself instead of waiting for government to do something. And so when you're thinking about, developing programs that might be specifically for specific geographic areas, even considering how are you doing rainbow responsive practice and rainbow violence prevention work in the context of those programs as well. So don't forget that we do have specific needs, as much as a lot of the things are quite the same as stock standard violence prevention, what you would need to do. Yeah, I'll stop there.
I could also add that Rainbow Violence Prevention Network has been working on the implementation of Te Aotearoa, the national strategy around preventing sexual violence and family violence, and that's involved a lot of working on ensuring that the kind of risk assessment tools and the practice tools that are coming out of that are also going to be really inclusive of all of these communities as well. And if I could maybe collect another question on the best practice guidelines, it does include ethnic communities, and it will be including also older rainbow people, and also that the sex and relationships guide that's on Gender Minorities Aotearoa's website does include a lot of representation of older rainbow people as well. It's, it's not just for young people.
Thank you, Ada. Just on the support for elder people as well. It was one of the areas that we put a little bit of thought into around the campaign. And so we did put some effort into making sure that the messaging of parts of our campaign were really targeted towards not just elders, but also the people who maybe have rainbow elders in their lives. And we also created a resource that was specifically talking about how to support rainbow elders in particular. This is one area though where more resource could go, more work, more even just research could be done to support more work happening in that area for sure. So another question we had is there a place or person or people to help with policy writing and advising? I'm in the community, but it's not a strength of mine.
I mean, I wish there was a funded position for this because it would be great. But it often ends up falling onto our community organizations to be able to help with policy writing and advising in this space as well. So if you've got more questions about that, I would very highly encourage you to reach out to, if not all of us individually, then reach out to the Rainbow Violence Prevention Network email to our coordinator, Camellia, and she can help to navigate that space as well, because there's lots of different ways that policy writing can show up, and all of us have a variety of different skill sets in that space. I'm going to pass over to Rafiqah.
In the points that I raised earlier, I want to bring this point about policy, because often when I said about people asking information out of us in inappropriate time, what happens with policy is that they expect us to do free labor, and often they put expectations, and what happens is, like, when you want authenticity, do not expect it to be in a box. And the reason why many of our community members would be hesitant to deal with policy is because often when they contribute, they don't see the outcomes. That's number one. And number two, people will take credit for it. And oftentimes, the people who take credit for it are the people in positions of power who already have a big salary. And one more thing to add is just try to put yourself in a person's position where you're struggling mentally, emotionally, and you are asked to do something this big, and then you get a lot of consequences as a result of it. So just be sensitive, and also if you want lived experiences, work is not free, and given the current situation of our political and economic climate, funding would be good.
Thank you, Rafiqah. Yeah, I think that sort of to both of the kind of last couple of points that have been made, it's definitely such an important thing that we want to encourage, really good consultation with rainbow communities, development of these policies. And we also want to encourage people to just think about how to do that really well. How do we make sure that we're respecting the time and the emotional labor of the people and the expertise of the people who are being asked to input on stuff? Ada.
Yeah, I'd say there's kind of a few levels you can do that kind of thing at, right? You can just get together and write whatever you think a good policy might be, and that's going to be at one level, or you can talk to all the rainbow people in your organization, ask them to do free extra work beyond what they're already doing, which they shouldn't have to do, and you might get a slightly better rainbow policy. Or you can, open your wallet and your heart and go out to people who have expertise in policy writing, rainbow communities, and in violence prevention, and you can talk to them. And that's probably the way that you're going to get the best result. You're not always going to, we're not always going to have enough capacity to write a policy for everyone, but a lot of us do have ongoing policy advice and policy writing projects. And I also just wanted to add, we had another question about how to get in touch with us. So RVPN.NZ has links to all of the organizations involved. We all have ways to contact us on those websites. We all try to reply to every contact that we get, phone, email, all kinds of different ways to get in touch with us. And we love hearing from people who want help, want to learn, and want to avail themselves of our services. So thank you.
Thanks, Ada. So I think that we're approaching the last couple of minutes, and we have quite a substantial last question here. So this probably will be the last question for the panel. We have a question from someone who works in a mainstream organization that supports people following concussion or brain injury, and that these are often the result of family or partner violence. And they're building the knowledge of working with rainbow communities for the organization, and also looking to increase their rainbow workforce. They want to partner with organizations such as RVPN so that injuries can be recognized early and addressed through a combination of your expertise and ours. Is that something that you believe that there is need for? How would you recommend that we connect?
So that was something I'd intended to partly address by saying, these are all the different ways you can contact us. Also, in terms of increasing rainbow workforce, one of the best steps for that is to build strong relationships with rainbow communities. And that means doing that work of ensuring that you've got a safe space through policy, through relationships with existing rainbow organizations in your area and nationally, and making those links so you can do that recruiting and retain that staff.
Right, thank you, Ada. So that is all of the questions that we've had through. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming along and engaging with this really important kōrero. It's a long, long road that we have in front of us. There's, as we've been talking about, so much that needs to happen, but it's taking the time in moments like this to have some of the hard conversations and figure out how it is that we can move forward together to improve outcomes that will help us move towards eliminating family violence towards rainbow people. So yeah, just a massive thank you to everyone. So I'll close us out with a karakia. Unahia, unahia. Unahia ki te uru tapanui. Kia watia, kia mama. Tanako, ta tinana, te waiuru. E te ara takata. Koia ra e rongo. Whakairia ake ki runga. Kia tina, tina. Huie, da kie.